Hello. Today we're going to talk about the researcher side of the human subjects pool. The pool is our system that gives undergraduates a chance to see psychological research firsthand. It's like their lab portion of a psychology class, while also providing a pool of participants for researchers to use in their studies. The students in our pool are predominantly introductory psychology course students, so Psych 201 and 202, as well as introductory linguistics course students who are required to complete a research requirement for their course that can be fulfilled by participating in research. Other psychology courses often offer extra credit for participation, but they aren't required to participate. The Human Subjects Coordinator role is to be a liaison between researchers, research compliance services, and the students who are participating in the pool. The pool is predominantly younger, so on average 19 years old, and they're predominantly female as well as predominantly Caucasian. And this data was collected from winter 2021. Now I'm going to explain a little bit more about the Human Subjects Coordinator role. Specifically, what I do is I make sure that studies on SONA are currently approved. And I also make sure there's enough studies available for students to participate in order to fulfill their requirement. I also approve your debriefings, so I make sure they have the right content that makes sure that this is an educational experiment for students. And then I give researchers credits to open time slots. So the number of credits you get mostly depends on how many researchers are using the pool at any given time and how many students are also participating in courses during that term. I also oversee the general survey and pre-screen, which we'll talk about more at the end of this presentation. As I alluded to, students' participation in the pool is supposed to be an educational experience. Undergraduates are participating because they're supposed to have an opportunity to see how research in psychology is conducted, and it is essential that we as researchers give students that experience. The debriefing is really crucial to giving students an educational experience because it explains what we did and why we used those methods and what we were seeking to understand. And that's where the educational component comes in, so students can actually learn from the study they are participating in. The debriefing also should explain how their participation is contributing to society. In addition to the right to a debriefing, students also have the right to an informed consent. So you must give them that informed consent before they participate. So students need to know what they are really in for so that they have the right to opt out at any time and still get credit for showing up. Specifically, if they choose that they are not psychologically or physically comfortable at any time in your study, they get 0.25 credits for every 15 minutes that they participated. So they should not feel coerced to stay, and they should know that they have the right to opt out at any time. And though I tell them that when I present to them in their course, they need to know that in their informed consent. Also, students have a right to a positive experience, so they should gain something for their time. So that's educational, but the study should be interesting, and that means that the debriefing should be interesting and should be actually informing them about something. Also, you need to be respectful of their time. So if your study is running long, make sure to ask students if they can stay and leave plenty of time for the debriefing, which you're required to leave 5 minutes for the debriefing. Overall, this means we're asking you to be a respectful and ethical researcher. This means a thorough informed consent and debriefing procedure, respectful interactions with students, and that you're supporting their learning. This also means you know how to use the pool correctly by knowing the procedures that we are asking you to know. And we ask this because students are informed of the procedures that the Human Subjects Pool follows, and they expect to have you follow that. So if they expect to receive credit by a certain time, or that you're going to be there, and if you're not and you don't provide them the half credit you're supposed to, that's not following the expectations they thought they were going to get. So they expect you to follow these procedures that we're going to talk about more throughout this presentation, so that they are getting this top-notch experience and this respectful experience that they expect to receive. So this means, knowing the Human Subjects Protocol, which will be linked throughout this presentation and at the end. However, students also have responsibilities just like you do. So some of those responsibilities that if they give informed consent, they are expected to give their undivided attention to your study. They're expected to pay attention to the researcher and make a real effort to understand and follow the instructions. So this means they should be ignoring their cell phones completely, be willing to remove headphones, not be engaged in other irrelevant activities, and be mentally able to engage in the study. So, sober, right? And if none of this is happening, then this is considered an adverse event. So if students are not making an effort to understand and follow the instructions, or if they're just simply clicking one throughout the whole study, you can politely ask them to leave the study and grant them credit for the time participated up to the nearest 15 minutes. So we do have to round up, but you can ask them to leave. And if a student drops out of your study for any unforeseen reasons regarding the study, or you have to ask them to leave, then you do need to report this as an adverse event to the Research Compliance Services and to myself, the Human Subjects Coordinator. We're now going to get into the nitty-gritty about how to use the Human Subjects Pool and the procedures that go into that. A lot of this information can be found on the Human Subjects Pool website, which is a blog's website maintained by the Human Subjects Pool Coordinator. You can see the link here. The website provides an overview of the required steps and the most important procedures that you'll need to follow. But the Human Subjects Protocol describes the entire procedure of the pool and has some detailed information that you really need to know. You are expected to read the protocol and pass a quiz on that protocol, which we'll talk about more, to use the pool. The protocol will be linked later in this presentation again, and also our Human Subjects Pool website, this blog's website, will be linked to a wiki on the psychology website very shortly. The blog's website for the Human Subjects Pool looks like this. You'll see if you hover over the tab in the menu that's labeled SONA Instructions for Researchers, a drop-down menu with many different tabs describes the very important topics about how to participate as a researcher in the Human Subjects Pool in the Psychology and Linguistics Department. So you see here that the first tab says Term Schedule and Requesting Credits. In this tab, you'll see information about when the credit allocations occur and when other important emails go out throughout the term about the Human Subjects Pool, as well as how to request credits. The next tab talks about obtaining a SONA account. So this links to the Human Subjects Protocol, which you also see there's a tab here about the Human Subjects Protocol. It also links to the Human Subjects Quiz so that you can read the protocol, take the quiz, and obtain a SONA account. The next tab is the Ethics tab, which specifically focuses on what should be in your informed consent, though we do not have to review the informed consent, as well as what should be in your debriefing. It has an example debriefing on there as well, which is a really great template to follow. And then it also discusses how you'll submit your debriefing, which we'll go through as well. But this is really important and great information, as we do have to, as the Human Subjects Coordinator, does have to review your debriefing. The next tab discusses creating your study on SONA. So there's a lot of great information here about how you're going to create your SONA study, how you'll name it, how it gets approved. And then this is a new information tab, which we'll talk about later in this presentation, but about when credit should be granted. Then there's a tab about the pre-screen and the general survey, which we'll also discuss. And then a tab about cancellations and no-shows, which again, we'll also discuss. A version of this presentation will also be on this website as well, if you want to review anything that you have seen in this presentation. So how to use the pool? Well, first you need to write a debriefing, and that debriefing is going to need to be approved by the Human Subjects Coordinator. So you can write a debriefing based on the example, which can be found on the website that I was just mentioning, and then you send that debriefing to the Human Subjects Coordinator for approval. So you can either email it to us, or you can submit online on the website. There's a link to submit on there through a Qualtrics survey, and then I'll get a notification, and then I will email you back about your approval. And if there's any updates that need to be done, I'll also email you about that, and we'll kind of have a chain of emails going until you get your approval. My written approval via email will count as proof of my approval to the IRB. So once I approve it, you can then take my written approval and put that in your IRB submission, and then you can submit it to the IRB, which is required for you to do any research using the human subjects pool. While you're waiting for IRB approval, you can then read the human subjects protocol and take the quiz if you haven't already. So the most updated protocol can be found on the website on the tab on the menu that I showed you on the last slide, and you will need to complete and pass the quiz before you use the pool. So more about the human subjects pool quiz. To read the protocol, you can link to it here. This goes to that tab that I was mentioning before. And to take the quiz, this goes to the tab that talked about how to create a study on SONA, how to get an account on SONA. You need to complete the quiz with a score of 18 or higher. So repeated attempts are allowed. If you don't get an 18 the first time, that's fine. You can take it again as many times as you need until you know the procedure well enough to pass the quiz. I will receive auto notification when you complete the quiz, and when you pass, I will create a researcher account for you. And if you want a PI account, you can say in that quiz that you want a PI account, and I will also create that for you. You will get an email from me notifying you about the creation of your researcher and/or PI account when it is done. You can then begin creating your study on SONA. You just can't begin collecting data on SONA until you have received IRB approval. When you are creating your study on SONA, you'll want to use the composer name as the name of your study. We use composer names to prevent selection bias because we don't want participants to pick the names of studies that sound interesting to them. We want them to randomly select their studies. In the same vein, we ask you not to describe your study in any way in the description or the abstract portion of the study. Only use logistical information like the location of the study or any eligibility requirements, etc. For finding the composer names, you can find a link to the list of Wikipedia names that we want you to pick from, as well as a list of previously used names to avoid on the website where you go and where it talks about creating your SONA study, as well as here in this presentation. You can also see that there is a link for SONA here on this presentation as well. You can also request credits even when you don't have IRB approval yet. So credit requests occur via email at the beginning of term, so a couple weeks before term actually, and then at weeks 3, 6, and 8. Week 8 is actually a forfeiture allocation where the credits, if you haven't used them, will be forfeited back to the pool to be given to people who need them. So be on the lookout for emails about credit allocations. The emails go out at the beginning of the week where you'll need to submit to the survey asking if you want to have any credits allocated to your account. And then at the end of the week is when the allocations actually occur. I do want to note that when you're setting up your study on SONA, to make sure you set it up correctly. There are in-lab and online studies that you could be setting up, so you want to make sure that you're picking the right method for the type of study that you need. For in-lab studies, make sure to specify the location. Sometimes students can get confused and then they'll no-show when they really didn't mean to. And then for online studies, make sure you have a way to grant credit since they're not actually coming in person. And make sure you're transparent with students about how and when credit will be provided, which we'll discuss more in this presentation in a little bit, but I just want to make sure that's noted here. More information about how to set up your studies correctly can be found on the blog's website. And then, once you have IRB approval, you can start collecting participants. And how you collect participants is by opening time slots on SONA, and I'll show you briefly how to do that at the end of this presentation. I want to take a second to discuss online studies and the variety of ways they can be set up. Some of the most popular online survey systems that people in the human subjects pool use and that the human subjects coordinators know how to provide assistance with include Qualtrics, where you have to log in using your banner ID, and the school does have an account for, and as well as Pavlovia, which we have an institutional login as well for, and you'll need to log on with your UO email. For online credit granting studies, we advise setting up automatic credit granting for these studies. SONA has instructions on how to set up online automatic credit granting, and it's at this link here. And there is help documentation for automatic credit granting for systems beyond Qualtrics and Pavlovia, but we cannot promise assistance in anything beyond those. How SONA does automatic credit granting is they provide a unique student ID to the survey system that you're using, so Qualtrics or Pavlovia. And then that survey system sends it back through a URL redirect at the end of the study to grant credit automatically, so you don't have to. However, there are some caveats with online studies that I want to make note of. Sometimes automatic credit granting can fail. A lot of times this is because students close out before the redirect occurs, or there can be errors in some of the survey systems. For instance, PsychoPie is newer and sometimes it has issues, and some of those ones that we don't know how to support might have issues as well. So beginning in winter 2022, so we haven't got there yet, but we are talking about it now because it's best practice, 2 new procedures will be required to help prevent issues with automatic credit granting. One of these is that you should include information about whether the study is automatic or manual credit granting in that online study. So if it's automatic, you need to remind students about the redirect before the debriefing. And at the beginning of the study, we ask you to tell students whether or not it's automatic or manual credit granting so that they just know the type of study they're participating in. And we want this to be the same across all online studies, so it's just something that students get used to seeing, and it's very transparent what they're participating in. We're going to require that researchers set up a backup manual credit granting system that records unique SONA IDs into a data file that then, if automatic credit granting fails, researchers can go look at and then grant that credit manually in SONA. So instructions about how to do both of these can be found online on the blog's website. We have a how-to document that is linked on that website. So it's a Word document that the website links to that shows you, specific how-to instructions to set up this backup manual credit granting system. It also shows you, or it discusses the exact language we will be requiring to be included in studies to talk about automatic versus manual credit granting. For right now, these are just best practices, but they will be required in winter 2022. When using credits, students get 0.25 credits for every 15 minutes of their time. So a 1-hour study is worth 1 whole credit. If the study goes over the expected time, they get 0.25 credits for every 15 minutes, always rounding up. So if you go over 1 minute, you have to round up to the next 15 minutes. If participants opt out, they still get 0.25 credits for starting the study, and this even counts in online studies. So you need to make sure that in your online studies, it says in the informed consent that if they're uncomfortable and they start the study, that they can contact you and still get credit. So they need to have a way to contact you. At the beginning, your contact information needs to be available so they can contact you and receive credit if they choose to opt out. The credit amounts you receive per allocation vary depending on the number of studies that are available and the participants that are available, as well as the type of research that you might be doing. So maybe there are less in-lab studies than there are online studies, so you might be able to get more research for that in-lab study or more credits for the in-lab study than the online studies if online studies are saturated but in-lab studies are not. If you do not use or schedule all of your credits, you will not get any more at the next allocation. But if you do use or just schedule them all out, so you're planning on using them all, you can request more credits at the next allocation. And then if you do not use all your credits by week 8, you will forfeit those credits back to the pool. So if you don't want to forfeit them, make sure to schedule them out. Beginning in winter 2022, you must also grant credit within 2 business days, so not including holidays or weekends, but business days. And if you do not grant credit within that time frame, you will be penalized. The penalty for this is that for the first offense where you're over 2 business days, you just get a warning, no loss of credit. But then these penalties accrue. So the second offense, you'll lose 10 credits from the next allocation. The third offense, you lose 20 credits from that next allocation. And for the fourth offense, you will not receive the next allocation, and further allocations are up to the Human Subjects Coordinator and their supervisor's decision. So if automatic credit granting fails because of the student, not your study having an issue, so I want to make this clear that if your study has an issue, then you need to have checked that in advance. You need to make sure that your automatic credit granting is working successfully. And if your study ends up having an issue and a bunch of students aren't granted credit because of that issue, that is on you, and then that does count toward an offense of a credit granting penalty. However, if it's one student and all the other ones seem to be working fine, then that's not an automatic credit granting failure. That's on the student for not doing the redirect. You have 2 business days from the day that you were notified by that student. Infractions are accumulated for 1 year from the first infraction. So let's say you get your first infraction on November 15th. Then that is noted in your account, and you have a whole year where these infractions are accruing, and the next year, November 15th, they're wiped clean. Now we're going to talk about no-shows and cancellations. Students can miss one study without any consequences. However, if they no-show or do not cancel responsibly for 2 or more studies, they'll no longer be eligible to use the human subjects pool to meet the requirement, and then they'll have to use the alternative assignment. So what's a responsible cancellation? Well, for students, they can cancel before 6 p.m. the night before a study or the participation due date for an online study. You, as a researcher, can cancel before 9 p.m. the night before. You can see there's a 3-hour difference because if you're doing a group study, you have a little bit more time in order to cancel so that you have notification, right? So if someone cancels at 6 p.m., you need to have time to cancel responsibly if you can no longer conduct your group study. And I want to emphasize that you do want to cancel responsibly. We don't want you as a researcher canceling late. That's not respectful to your participants. And if you cancel irresponsibly, you will get an email from me. If you cancel late, you are also expected to give the participant half of the credit of what that time slot was worth if you cancel late or you no-show on the participant. So for instance, if the study was worth 1 credit and you cancel late or no-show, you have to give the participant half credit, so 0.5 credit if it was worth 1 whole credit. So when I say no-show, that means you just didn't show up. If you arrive late and the participant can no longer participate because you arrived late, you still owe them half of the credit of what that time slot was worth. And I want to emphasize that you need to make sure your research assistants know this too. Though you might know the procedures and know how to be a respectful researcher, if you don't tell your research assistants this, who are the ones who are mostly running these time slots, then these instances may still happen. Another service that the Human Subjects Coordinator provides is the pre-screening. So the pre-screening is a short measure, taking no more than 30 minutes total for everyone who uses it, which allows researchers a chance to identify the perfect subjects for their study. For example, maybe you can't have participants who need glasses, or you only want participants who score in a certain range on a really short scale. So to pre-screen for a certain type of subjects, you must have explicit IRB permission to do so. If this sounds like something that's interesting to you, what you'll need to do is wait for and respond to the email inviting you to fill out the pre-screening application at the end of each term. This comes out several weeks before the start of the quarter, since the pre-screening needs IRB approval itself. Another service that the Human Subjects Coordinator provides is the General Survey. The General Survey is a longer measure in which you can put actual scales for data collection in. This is useful because it is unfortunate for you to waste 0.5 credits on a really short measure. So in this, researchers can submit up to 4 between subjects conditions, and each condition should take no more than 10 minutes. The General Survey gets its own IRB approval, so you do not have to get it yourself for your measure. The only caveat is if you do want to link the data in the General Survey to another study, kind of like an expanded pre-screen, then you do need IRB approval to do that. However, I do want to mention that linking data to another study, though it can be useful, but it tends to get a smaller N. The General Survey email goes out at the same time as the pre-screen email, so several weeks before the beginning of term. All right, so a note in the era of COVID. When classes are in person, so it's currently for fall 2021, classes are in person, then there is a requirement for in-person and lab participation. What that means is that 40% of a student's credits, or 2 out of 4.5 for an intro class, need to be done in lab. This helps in lab studies get participants, as otherwise participants would just choose to do online studies. However, when classes are fully remote, and if this were ever to happen again for some unfortunate reason, then there will be no requirement for in-lab or lab participation. Students are still required in those terms to do 4.5 credits for intro courses, meaning SONA is still very active, but usually those students are only participating in online studies. So though labs can still get approval through the IRB for in-person research, and they just can't really expect high participation. Also, they don't need any extra approval from the Human Subjects Coordinator to do in-lab research, even if there are requirements are in place throughout the university. If this ever does happen again, where a fully remote term is occurring and your lab is still approved for in-lab research, you may want to consider using pay as compensation instead of credit. So now we're going to do a brief overview of SONA. You can see there's a link at the bottom to SONA systems as well. When you log in, you'll see that this is the main landing page for a researcher or PI account. On the menu at the top hand side of the screen and the top left-hand side of the screen, you'll see that it starts with My Studies, which are any studies that are attached to this account. Then you'll see All Studies, which are all studies currently active on SONA. You'll see the ability to add a new study, frequently asked questions, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see My Profile, and then Log Out. If you scroll down, you'll see there are more information for My Studies, so you can view and edit your studies, view and edit time slots that are currently active, and view uncredited time slots. For this PI account, which is my Human Subjects Coordinator PI account, you'll see there are 51 uncredited time slots. These are because all of these studies are online studies, and when anyone signs up to participate in online studies through SONA, they can sign up to reserve their time slot without actually participating at that current moment. They can then participate later. That makes it an uncredited time slot. This is why automatic credit granting is really important, or the backup credit granting system, because you have to have some way to know that someone participated, since when they sign up, it's unclear whether they just signed up to reserve their spot or if they signed up and then participated and an error occurred. So you have to have some way in order to know that they participated. You'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see all the studies that are currently active or had recent activity attached to my PI account. And then you can see, again, there's just more information about how to add a new study, if I want to change my password, and so on. So let's say I clicked on the study Smirnov on the side of the screen. When I initially click on this study, it's already a created study. I'm just going to get the study information. The study information for this study is that it's an online external study. That means the study is hosted on a survey system outside of SONA. Though you can technically host studies on an internal survey system within SONA. We do not recommend that. It's not very user-friendly. This also provides information about whether the study is active. You can see that it is visible to participants, and it is an active study. You can see the duration and the number of credits. You can then see below that there's a link to view my study online. You'll want to press this link to make sure that it actually is working. You'll want to press the sample link to make sure that works as well. And then you'll see that there's a Qualtrics redirect to a URL. When setting up automatic credit granting, this link will be used in the automatic credit granting setup. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that the study does not have any pre-screen restrictions. However, if I did want to set up pre-screen restrictions, I would press on the View and Modify Restrictions green button here. I would only do that if I have IRB approval to do so, and would have had to submitted to the pre-screen at the end of the previous term. You can then see that I have my RCS approval code here, and I also have the direct link to my study here, and the date it was created, and the researcher and principal investigator name. You always have to have a researcher and PI name. If there's only one, like it's just the same person, then you should use the same name as you can see here. If I scroll lower on the study information screen, I'll see the study menu. The study menu has some very useful pieces of information for it, specifically the view and administer time slots and the change study information. So we're going to go first to the change study information page that I am circling here. So when we go to change study information, this is slide 1, I'm going to kind of go through all the information that's included in a study information page. You'll see that there's the study name. There's also the abstract and detail information, which again, we don't want you to provide any study specific information. This is just logistical. If you have eligibility requirements, you can put them here, and then the duration or minutes of the study, and then the credits. You'll see that as the PI, now that I've created the study once and had it approved by the Human Subjects Coordinator, I cannot change the credits. I have to submit that I have to resubmit for approval from the Human Subjects Coordinator in order to have them change it if I want to change the credits. So let's say I change the duration of my study to 45 minutes and the credits need to be changed to 0.75. I'll have to submit a request for the Human Subjects Coordinator to do this. This is so we don't have researchers saying, I'll pay participants 1 whole credit for a shorter study so I get more participants, because that wouldn't be fair. And if you have any preparation requirements, or you can put that down here as well, and then you'll see there's a place to put the researcher. Below that, you'll then see that there's information about the principal investigator name, as well as the RCS approval code and the expiration date. So again, if I want to change any of this information, I'll have to email the Human Subjects Coordinator to have that be changed. Then if I don't want, I can still make my study inactive myself. So maybe I just don't want it to be available currently. I can do that as the PI myself. And then I can save the changes at the bottom of here. Advanced settings include putting prerequisites, like maybe I want participants to have completed a previous study or have completed a general survey. So I would put that study here. Or if I want them to have not participated in a previous study, which is what people usually use, then I would put that in the disqualifier spot on the study information page. If I want them to have an invitation code, I can put that here as well. And also, though I don't recommend this, if you want them to have a random unique ID code instead of the unique SONA ID code that is specific to them, you can press yes here. So what that means is that they'll get a random unique ID code specific to your study, but it won't be specific to them as a participant. This makes it slightly harder for the Human Subjects Coordinator to help you look up that student if there's any issues with automatic credit granting. So I don't recommend this unless you have to for any reason for a grant or something. And then below this, you see there's the study URL. So this is where you'll put in the study URL, and then you'll add whatever code is required at the end to set up automatic credit granting. So for Qualtrics here, you see there's a question mark ID equals percentage survey code percentage. That's what Qualtrics requires, but it differs for every survey system. Then if we go back to the study menu, now we're going to go to the view and administer time slots. So on a view and administer time slots, we can see that this already is an open time slot here. And so this time slot has since it's an online study, has a participation deadline of December 17th, 2021 at 9 a.m. The number of open time slots here is 226. The total is 280. So that means there's total 280 time slots that anyone could participate in. 226 are still open, 54 have signed up. So you can see that a PI only gets to see the first name of the participant, and then here is where we see the survey ID. Only online studies have unique SONA survey IDs. In-person studies do not. You just get to see their name, their first name. No, you'll never see their full name. You can see here that this first participant, it says awaiting action. That means that they haven't been granted credit. Usually what that means is that they've signed up, but they haven't participated. If there was some credit granting issue, then that's where we need that backup credit granting system to be able to manually grant credit. You can see below it that credit has already been granted for all the other participants. If I want to modify this, I can modify the time slot here on the right, and this is where I might go and press that button and just add more time slots to this this time slot I already have. Or I can go to the top where there's a green button here. This says add a time slot, and I might just add and create a completely new time slot with a different participation deadline. So let's say I selected the add a new time slot button, then I get a screen that looks like this. So here on the left-hand side of the screen, I can create a new final participation date, a new final participation timeline, and a new maximum number of studies, because this is a completely new time slot, or new number of maximum participants participating in this time slot, because this is a completely new time slot. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen that this is one method in which I can see the time slot and credit usage of my account. So at the top hand row of this table, you'll see my already used hours. So these are the hours that have ever been used attached to the Human Subjects Coordinator PI account. This number is rather large because this account has historically been in place for many, many years and conducted many studies. The currently scheduled hours is only 220, so that means these are the number of hours that are scheduled and open for participants to participate in, but they are not ones that have already been used. And then total hours is the combination of already used hours and scheduled hours. My usage limit is incredibly high because I'm the Human Subjects Coordinator, and that's because I'm running studies for tons of people, but and not running them for myself. But this is where you would go if you want to see your time slot usage. Another way to see your time slot usage is going to the main SONA landing page and then going to the My Profile in the right-hand corner of the page. If you press on My Profile and then scroll to the bottom of the My Profile, you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see all the studies that have ever been attached to that account, which again is a lot for the Human Subjects Coordinator PI account. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll again see your study time usage limit. So this is the same information that was available in the time slot, But here it's available without having to go through a study and create and add a new time slot. You can just see it attached to your profile. So if we go back to the SONA landing page, I can also just add a new study by going to the top of the menu and clicking on Add a New Study. So I just wanted to mention what types of new studies you can add. So you can add a standard lab study. You can also do this in a multi-part study. So that means where you're asking participants to come in 2 times, 3 times, or 4 times. You can also do online external studies, and these can also be multi-part. And then you can do an internal study, which is a SONA internal study, which we do not recommend. All of these can be done as paid studies or credit studies. And if you do a paid study, you'll want to make sure that you have a paid PI account attached to it. So if this is something you're interested in doing, please make sure to contact me about that. And also, if you choose to do video conferencing, you can set that up as a standard lab study. So though I didn't mention that in the time slots, I was showing you an online study time slot. For a in-person lab study time slot, the time slots vary, and instead of showing participation deadlines, it'll ask you to put in the actual date, time, and location of your study. In that case, and if you want to do video conferencing, you can do that through the standard study because you'll need to still set up the date and time. If you have any more questions about any of the information that was talked about in this presentation, you can email the Human Subjects Coordinator at hscord@uoregon.edu. You can also, if you have any questions about the IRB or any ethics concerns, contact Research Compliance Services at researchcompliance@uoregon.edu. And then please don't forget to review the human subjects procedures and protocols on the website and read through the human subjects protocol as well.